The cameras were rolling, the world was watching, and in seconds, Trump was left speechless. Subscribe now, because if you think this opening moment was explosive, wait until you hear how the judge's tirade tore apart Trump's ego piece by piece. This is the story the cameras couldn't capture, but the world will never forget. The courtroom was packed. Cameras weren't rolling inside, but the energy was so thick it could be felt through every headline, every whisper leaking from those walls. And at the center of it all, Donald J. Trump, confident smirk plastered across his face, convinced this would be just another performance. He leaned back, arms crossed, the picture of arrogance. But then it happened. The judge leaned forward, eyes locked on him, voice booming with a force no one expected, in front of lawyers, staff, and stunned onlookers. Trump was called out, caught in the act. No more games, no more dodging, no more bluster. The gavel wasn't just a symbol that day. It was a weapon of truth. The air shifted. Trump's face flushed. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but the judge cut him off mid-breath. The courtroom had never seen him so cornered, so powerless. The man who thrived on controlling the room had finally met someone who refused to bow. And then the words came, sharp, devastating, undeniable. It wasn't just a reprimand. It was an unleashing. The kind of verbal strike that echoed beyond the walls of the courtroom, straight into the headlines and across the internet. The audience gasped. Reporters scribbled furiously. And in that moment, one truth became clear. Trump wasn't untouchable anymore. The gavel's echo had barely faded when the weight of the moment began to sink in. This wasn't just another courtroom skirmish. It was the collision of a man who had built his empire on defiance and a legal system now determined to hold him accountable. The stakes were nothing less than Trump's credibility, his financial empire, and his shot at reclaiming political power. The case itself was more than legal jargon. It was a mirror held up to the nation. Trump stood accused of bending the truth for profit, of maneuvering the system to inflate his worth when it suited him and minimize it when accountability came knocking. For years, whispers had swirled about his empire being built on smoke and mirrors. But here in this courtroom, those whispers had turned into sworn testimony, financial records, and a judge unwilling to play along. And yet Trump didn't see it that way. To him, every hearing was a stage, every accusation an opportunity to play the martyr, to spin his narrative of persecution. He waved to the cameras outside, railed about witch hunts, and declared himself the victim of a grand conspiracy. His base cheered, convinced their champion was being targeted by a corrupt establishment. But inside the courtroom, stripped of the roar of rally crowds, the truth looked very different. The judge, methodical and unflinching, laid out the evidence piece by piece. Documents signed by Trump's own hand. Emails from executives who once followed his every order. Financial records that told a story impossible to ignore. Trump shifted in his seat, but the details cut deeper with every passing moment. The press outside the courtroom sensed it too. Every reporter knew this wasn't just another scandal. It was a test of whether the law could pierce through decades of bravado. Headlines screamed about Trump on trial, and pundits debated whether the fallout would strengthen his campaign or finally derail it. And in that packed room, with tension so thick it felt like a live wire humming in the air, the balance shifted. Trump wasn't the one dictating the story anymore. The judge had taken control, refusing to be bullied, refusing to let the hearing dissolve into chaos. It was the one scenario Trump dreaded most, being forced to answer without being able to dominate. Still, no one in that courtroom could have predicted just how far the judge was willing to go. This wasn't going to be a quiet reprimand or a gentle reminder of procedure. What came next would be remembered not just as a legal ruling, but as a turning point, a moment when even Donald Trump, with all his wealth and bravado, was reminded that there are lines that cannot be crossed. And when the judge's full fury erupted, it would send shockwaves far beyond the courtroom. To understand the magnitude of what was happening in that courtroom, you have to look back at the man sitting at the defense table. For decades, Donald Trump thrived on bending rules, dodging oversight, and turning every challenge into a spectacle. From the glittering towers bearing his name to the fiery, political rallies that drew crowds by the thousands, he built an image of untouchable strength. But beneath the golden veneer lay a pattern of lawsuits settled in silence, contractors left unpaid, and bankruptcies spun as business genius. Time and again, Trump walked away unscathed, his empire intact, his ego even larger. He wore scandal like armor, each controversy somehow fueling the myth that he was beyond consequence. Politics only amplified that persona. As president, he dismissed critics as liars, painted investigators as enemies, and portrayed himself as the victim of a corrupt system. Every courtroom loss or damaging report was brushed off as fake news. Every indictment spun into a rallying cry. To his loyal base, he wasn't a man under scrutiny. He was a warrior battling on their behalf. And yet, the arrogance that carried him so far was the very thing now threatening to undo him. In this trial, the evidence wasn't partisan spin or political theater. It was cold, hard numbers, backed by documents and testimony that spoke louder than any campaign slogan. The judge's refusal to bow to Trump's bluster was a direct challenge to the strategy he had relied on for decades: intimidate, deflect, and dominate. For the first time, Trump's old playbook wasn't working, and the audience, both inside that courtroom and across the country, was about to witness what happens when the myth of invincibility collides with the immovable force of the law. While Trump had built his empire on spectacle, the figure across from him represented the very opposite. The judge was not a celebrity, not a headline chaser, and certainly not someone who bowed to intimidation. Their story was one of discipline, service, and a lifelong commitment to the rule of law. Long before this trial began, the judge had built a reputation for fairness and rigor. Colleagues described them as meticulous, someone who read every line of testimony, checked every precedent, and came to the bench with decisions grounded not in ideology, but in the letter of the law. In a world where politics often cloud judgment, this judge was respected for standing firm, even when rulings drew fire from powerful figures. That reputation mattered now, because when Trump entered the courtroom, he brought with him the same weapons he had wielded for decades: swagger, intimidation, and the ability to dominate the spotlight. But for the judge, this wasn't about politics or spectacle. It was about accountability. Their journey to this bench was not glamorous. It had been years of study, grueling clerkships, and an unshakable belief that the law was the great equalizer. Friends recalled late nights spent poring over cases, driven not by ambition for fame, but by a desire to uphold justice for ordinary people. That quiet determination had carried them through challenges Trump could never understand. Because for this judge, dignity and integrity were not branding tools. They were guiding principles, and it showed in the way they presided. No matter how loudly Trump's lawyers protested, no matter how many times he rolled his eyes or muttered under his breath. The judge never wavered, calm, composed, and measured. They reminded the court and the country that justice is not swayed by arrogance. It was that steady presence, that refusal to bend to intimidation. That set the stage for what came next. Because when the moment arrived to confront Trump directly, the judge's words would not only cut through the theatrics, they would pierce the very myth of invincibility he had spent a lifetime constructing. The courtroom, already heavy with tension, began to crackle as Trump's defense tried to seize control of the narrative. His lawyers raised objections at every turn, their voices sharp and insistent, hoping to drown out the steady rhythm of the prosecution's case. Trump leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, flashing the occasional smirk as if daring the judge to challenge him. But the judge did not flinch. Each objection was handled with crisp authority, sustained when valid, overruled when hollow. The gavel became the counterpoint to the defense's interruptions, a reminder that chaos would not reign here. Trump's irritation grew visible. His jaw tightened, his hands drummed against the table, and he whispered fiercely to his attorneys, urging them to push harder. Then came the turning point. Trump, unable to contain himself, broke the silence with a muttered outburst, audible enough for the room to hear. Gasps rippled through the audience. The judge looked up, eyes locking on him, with the kind of calm authority that can silence even the loudest room. In that instant, the balance shifted. Trump was no longer the showman commanding the spotlight. He was the defendant losing control. Every attempt to rattle the court only dug him deeper. And though the judge's full rebuke was still moments away, the escalation made one thing clear. Trump's old tactics were crumbling in real time. The crowd leaned in, bracing for what everyone sensed was coming next. The moment Trump opened his mouth, trying to hijack the proceedings with his trademark bluster, the judge's patience snapped into focus. The room froze as the judge leaned forward, voice steady but sharp enough to slice through the noise. "Mr. Trump," the judge began, tone heavy with authority, "this is not your rally stage. This is a court of law. And in this room, facts, not insults, carry weight." A hush fell over the chamber. Even Trump's attorneys shifted uncomfortably, their usual confidence cracking as the spotlight turned squarely on their client. Trump attempted a smirk, but the judge pressed on, stacking words like bricks in a wall he could not climb. "For years you have treated accountability as optional, consequences as negotiable, but not here. Here, your actions, your words, your records, they all stand under scrutiny, and no amount of theatrics will erase them." The crowd erupted in murmurs. For once, Trump wasn't controlling the narrative. His face, usually defiant, tightened as the judge continued. "You will respect this court. You will respect this process. And if you cannot, the consequences will be swift and severe." The words landed like hammer blows. Trump shifted in his seat, visibly rattled. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for a lifeline, but none came. The cameras, the press, the audience, they were all locked on a man stripped of his armor. The judge's final words hung in the air, crisp and devastating. "No one is above the law, not even you." The silence that followed was electric. For the first time, Donald Trump had been publicly cornered in a space he couldn't dominate. And as the gavel struck, the world leaned closer, knowing this confrontation was far from over, but already unforgettable. The judge's rebuke didn't end when the gavel fell. It detonated like a thunderclap across the nation. Within minutes, reporters rushed from the courthouse, microphones raised, voices breathless as they relayed every word of the exchange. Clips of Trump being silenced in court spread like wildfire, flooding news feeds, timelines, and TV screens. On cable news, anchors replayed the moment again and again, their voices tinged with disbelief. Commentators debated whether this was the first crack in Trump's aura of invincibility, or just another storm he would spin to his advantage. Yet, the imagery was undeniable. The self-proclaimed strongman being cut down to size, not by an opponent on a stage, but by the steady authority of the law. Social media amplified the spectacle. Hashtags like "Nam no one above the law" and "Judge vs. Trump" trended within hours. Memes surfaced almost instantly. Trump's stunned expression beside captions declaring, "Game over." Supporters of accountability cheered, sharing the clip with words like "finally" and "justice served." Even some of his allies were forced into silence, struggling to spin the optics of their leader looking cornered. Late-night comedians seized on the moment, their monologues dripping with punchlines about Trump, being treated like any other defendant. Editorial boards weighed in too, declaring the judge's words a turning point, a reminder that the system, for all its flaws, could still stand firm. The shockwaves had only begun to spread, and what came next promised to reshape not only Trump's future, but the faith of millions in the idea that power must answer to the truth. When the echoes of that courtroom moment finally settled, what lingered wasn't just the sound of the gavel, it was the meaning behind it. For years, many had asked whether justice still carried weight in a country where wealth and influence so often seemed to bend the rules. The judge's words answered that question. With clarity, accountability is not optional, not even for the powerful. That was the lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Trump's supporters had long seen him as untouchable, a man immune to consequence. But the confrontation revealed a truth that could not be spun away, that the law applies equally, whether to the worker who signs a loan or the mogul who manipulates billions. The power of that moment wasn't just in humbling one man. It was in reminding millions that the ideals of fairness, dignity, and equality under the law still mattered. It was a story larger than Trump. It was America, looking itself in the mirror and asking, do we still believe in justice? And for those who watched in disbelief as arrogance met its match, the answer was yes. The court had spoken not with theatrics, but with principle. The message was simple, yet profound. Dignity is greater than bravado, truth greater than bluster. As people replayed the scene, they weren't just watching a judge correct a defendant. They were watching history declare that even in a time of division and doubt, the system could rise to meet its purpose. And that reminder that justice still has a heartbeat was the victory everyone could carry forward. And so, the scene that began as another Trump courtroom spectacle ended as something very different, a turning point. The man who once thrived on chaos, who fed on spectacle and dominated every stage, had finally been silenced, not by politics, not by opponents, but by the impartial voice of the law. It was more than a legal drama. It was a reminder that arrogance, no matter how loud, will always fall short against dignity and truth. That moment captured the clash between entitlement and accountability, and for once, accountability won. But here's the thing. This story doesn't end in the courtroom. It continues with us, those watching, sharing, and remembering. Because when we amplify these moments, when we hold power to the same standard, no matter the name attached, we strengthen the very foundation of justice itself. Trump may walk out of court and return to rallies, cameras, and sound bites, but the image of him humbled under the judge's words will remain. It's a symbol, a signal that even the mightiest can be checked, even the loudest can be silenced when the truth stands firm. And that's why this matters, not just for one case, but for every person who believes that fairness should never be optional. So if you believe in that principle, if you want more stories where dignity triumphs over arrogance, don't just watch, be part of this movement. Subscribe now, share this video, and let your voice join the chorus saying loud and clear, "No one is above the law." Because today it was Trump. Tomorrow, it could be anyone. And justice deserves our attention.